One of the common mistakes that parents can make in IEP team meetings is to be evasive. Please don't be evasive, and we're going to give you some examples.
So one thing that parents do a lot, and again, sometimes it's at the IEP meeting, sometimes it's just in their regular dealings with the school district, is the school district will ask permission to speak to an outside service provider that's working with the child's doctor, the child's psychiatrist, and the parent will say, I'm not going to give you consent to speak to that person. And here's the thing, sometimes there's a really good reason that the parent doesn't want to share that information. And by law, you're actually not required to. Just because you're not required to, though, doesn't mean it's a good idea, because here's the thing. Down the road, if you end up in a dispute with your school district and you're trying to convince a hearing officer that your school district did not offer an appropriate program, they are definitely going to say, if only we had had that information we wanted from the doctor or the psychiatrist, we could have developed an appropriate program. And now you just got turned around on your probably very good case because you withheld information.
Well, and the other day I had a parent say to me, you know, I'm not going to share that report that I just got from Dr. XYZ. And I said, well, why? Well, they've never done anything that I've asked them to do before. I said, well, what are you going to do? Look at the report? What, are you going to keep it next to your bedside? No, you've got to share it with the school.
Yeah, and again, you can legally say, I'm not going to do that, but ultimately what's going to happen is that they're going to use it as the reason why your child's not making progress, why the program isn't appropriate. And so it's a good idea to just share that information. If you're concerned that the school district doesn't understand the information that they're getting, there are other ways to allow for that. As an example, well, I would like to share it with you, but we want to make sure that a psychologist is actually reading this, because we don't think that the regular education teacher is the person who is properly trained to interpret this. I mean, there's ways to make sure that you're getting the information across in a way that makes sense, but if you withhold it, you know, when parents say to me, well, I don't want to give that to them, my first response is there something that you're trying to keep from the school district? Are you hiding something? And their answer is almost always, no, I'm not hiding anything. And I'm going to say, yeah, but now you look like you're hiding something. So withholding that kind of information, it just ends up really biting the parent.
Right. And also in addition to evaluations, if there's something that you need to share with the school district about what's going on at home or in the community, you really should think about whether or not you need to share that. Now, barring the fact that there's something very major that you don't believe is anybody's business. But if it does relate to how your child is performing in school, functionally or academically, you're going to want to think twice about withholding information like that.
Well, as an example, I have a lot of clients whose children are in some kind of emotional distress, especially when they get to adolescence. And so sometimes those students will hurt themselves outside of school or attempt to hurt themselves, and the parent chooses not to share that with the school. And ultimately, if the situation escalates to a crisis where, in fact, maybe the child should be identified as having an emotional disability, or the child is already identified for services, but now we need to consider these emotional issues, if you haven't told the school, it's going to be awfully hard for you to say, I want you to help me out with this, if they had no idea what was happening and you're just starting back at square one.
Another one is if you're providing services to your child outside of the school district, whether they're independently, privately paid for, occupational therapy services, speech and language services, psychological services, psychiatric services, you are going to want to consider sharing that with the school district. And there's some really good reasons why, because it really, for all intent and purposes, perhaps those services should be taken care of by the school district. Perhaps not, but if you're ever going to get to the point where you actually want to talk to the school about taking over those services, you can't have that conversation if you ever let them know that you were providing it privately in the first place.
That's right. And on top of that, down the road, you may be in a situation where those private services that either you or your insurance is covering are really the reason that the child is making progress, that your child is making progress, and the school will take credit for that. And if you then say, well, I've been supplementing the program with 5 hours a week of speech and they didn't know about it for the last 2 years, then that puts you in an awkward situation. Another example of some information that parents often withhold is information about medication.
Yeah.
I don't know if you see this a lot, Julie.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I can understand why parents want to do that. They say that's a medical issue. It's really not the school district's business. And there's, again, good reason for all of these things, but ultimately it is important that your school district is aware of medications that your child is on for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is if a medical crisis arose, you'd want to make sure that someone at the school is aware.
Right. And though I honestly appreciate the fact that there may be some compelling reason why you don't want to share that with the school district. And I think that has to be respected. But you really need to think twice about whether or not you should share that. As you said, Jen, if the medication is perhaps helping or hindering and the school district doesn't know about it, then what can they do? There might be some knowledge they really should have.
So overall, as a general rule, we are just saying we think you should be very forthcoming with the school district about information about your child. There may be times where if we knew the details of it, we'd say, yes, we agree, you shouldn't share that information. If you got a report that has a wrong piece of data in it that you absolutely disagree with, that you paid for, and you don't want to show it to the school because it's just flat wrong. There are some circumstances where we'd say, yeah, in that case, don't share that information with the school, but as a general rule, be forthcoming.